Nobody should underestimate the Israeli Air Force, their intelligence. They have proven that they have absolutely the upper hand when it comes to intelligence gathering. They are able to, strike within meters, yards whether it's Beirut, whether it's in Tehran, whether it's in Houthi-controlled Yemen. So Israel's got plenty of capabilities. But we have to remember Iran's nuclear program. We're not talking about one facility or two or even five facilities. We're talking dozens of facilities where the Iranian side has, learned the lesson from other nuclear facilities that were taken out over the years by the Israelis in Syria or in Iraq. And they've scattered it out across a country that's 3 times the size of France. And I just don't know militarily whether Israel alone can pull it off. And pull it off doesn't mean they can't strike at any of those facilities. The question is, can they strike enough and hard enough to be able to say, we stop the program?
The US President Joe Biden has been talking to other world leaders on a G7 conference call and has repeated his urging for de-escalation. He said Israel should respond proportionately and told reporters he did not support strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. And his calls for restraint come as the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed that Iran will pay for last night's missile attack. Let's talk to Alex Vatanka, who is a founding director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute and author of The Battle of the Ayatollahs in Iran, the United States foreign policy and political rivalry since 1979. Good evening to you, Alex.
Good evening to you, Carol. Great to be with you.
Well, it's good to have you with us. What do you think Iran will be planning at this stage in this incredibly tense stage of the conflict?
Well, Carol, let me start off by telling you what they're officially saying they will be doing, which is to do nothing, essentially, unless the Israelis take revenge on Iran, in which case we've heard Iranian leaders from the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei to senior commanders of the Revolutionary Guards to the president himself, this fellow by the name of Masoud Pezeshkian, who is supposed to be a moderate. But on this issue, even he has come out and said, if Israel retaliates, then Iran will hit back at Israel again. So, I really feel that the Iranian regime, the last thing they want is some kind of an open military conflict with Israel, because frankly, we know that very quickly will bring the United States and other probably Western powers on the side of Israel. And that's a sort of a flashpoint, that situation that Iran really cannot afford to see come about.
Yeah, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this evening saying his country's in the middle of a tough war against Iran's axis of evil and has vowed that Iran will pay for last night's missile attack. I mean, you say that Iran doesn't want to get dragged into direct conflict with Israel. But I mean, didn't it do that last night when it sent that barrage of missiles, almost 200 missiles at Israeli territory?
So there are two parts to my answer in given what you just said. So just providing a bit of a context. So obviously the Iranians did what they did, and it was clearly an attack on Israel after Israel killed the leader of Hezbollah in Beirut Friday, Hassan Nasrallah. So if you go back to, say, April of this year, when we last had an Iranian missile attack on Israel, what you've had in terms of processes, the Israelis have taken action, the Iranians have retaliated. So from Iran's point of view, Israel's sort of crossing their red lines and they're retaliating. That said, what Iran does not want to accept, which I think is the core problem here, is it's Iran that doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist as a country. Now, Iran has all sorts of problems with how the Israelis are treating the Palestinians. That's fine. But there are ways where you go about trying to help the Palestinian people or push forward for a two-state solution. Iran's approach of giving arms and rockets and missiles to non-state actors, be it Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, and so forth, that's not the solution. And the Israelis are in a position where they felt it was time for them to make Iran bleed. And that's essentially what they have been doing increasingly. And if you listen to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's video to the Iranian people the other day, he's upping the ante. He's talking about freeing the Iranian people from the Islamist regime in Tehran. So this is kind of in many ways a new territory we've sort of entered upon.
Do you interpret those words then from the Israeli Prime Minister as suggesting that he is actually trying to have regime change in Tehran?
Oh, I think Benjamin Netanyahu probably at this point would love to see regime change in Tehran. That's what he would like to see. Can he bring that about? That's a whole different proposition. And it's not just Israel that would have a tough time trying to get that done if that's what they wanted to do. The American side, probably still to this day, the most formidable power on planet Earth, couldn't probably at this point, or at least doesn't have the political will to do so. So, again, it's a question of what Israel wants to see from their point of view and what they're able to do on their own, or in terms of a coalition that needs to exist to get it done. And Carol, we all know the last 20 years with the various Western interventions in the Middle East, there's at least a mixed record there. So there's a lot of hesitation. Certainly here in Washington, where I sit, when people hear words like regime change, that's a no-no. Americans, and you heard that again yesterday in this vice presidential debate, America is right now focused on American issues at home. And again, that's going to be a very steep climb for Netanyahu or anybody else who's going to make the argument for regime change in Tehran.
And the other thing to which President Biden has been saying no is this suggestion that Israel could contemplate strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. Do you think that that is a realistic prospect?
Look, nobody should underestimate the Israeli Air Force, their intelligence. They have proven that they have absolutely the upper hand when it comes to intelligence gathering. They are able to, strike within meters, yards whether it's Beirut, whether it's in Tehran, whether it's in Houthi-controlled Yemen. So Israel's got plenty of capabilities. But we have to remember Iran's nuclear program. We're not talking about one facility or two or even 5 facilities. We're talking dozens of facilities where the Iranian side has, learned the lesson from other nuclear facilities that were taken out over the years by the Israelis in Syria or in Iraq. And they've scattered it out across a country that's 3 times the size of France. And I just don't know militarily whether Israel alone can pull it off. And pull it off doesn't mean they can't strike at any of those facilities. The question is, can they strike enough and hard enough to be able to say, we stop the program? That's the big question, because Iran's nuclear program isn't something they bought somewhere in Europe, as has been the case with other countries in the past. It's an indigenous program, so they can rebuild. And what the danger of an Israeli action that's on its own without US or Western support is that the Iranians will turn around and say, well, look, we're going to pull out of the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We're going to go and weaponize because that's the only way we can protect ourselves against Israel. That's not a good situation for the United States to be at either.
One final point. We've now got Israeli forces on the ground inside southern Lebanon. 8 of them have been killed today in direct clashes with Hezbollah. Do you think that ground incursion does make a difference? Iran, obviously a huge backer of Hezbollah.
That's the sort of situation the Iranians would like to see, this sort of slow bleeding, if you will, of Israel. And if the price to pay is that Iran's Arab militant partners like Hezbollah or Hamas are the ones that are doing the dying, then that, from Iran's point of view, that seems to be okay, as long as the war doesn't come to the Iranian homeland, which take us to the core issue. Why did Iran create these proxy networks in the first place and invested so much in them? It's to have these fights in the region through your proxies, so you keep the sort of the temperature, the heat out there and not on Iranian soil. It's not a sustainable policy, if you ask me. I think the Israelis are calling Iran's bluff, if you want to call it that, and saying, we're not going to sit back and let you be the mothership far away and just finance and arm and see us suffer without paying the consequences. So, I think, frankly, at this point, Israel would love to see Iran step down and choose to focus on what Iranian people care about, issues relating to Iran at home, having the sanctions removed and all the rest of it, and let the Arab world deal with the issue of Israel-Palestinian, problem that needs to be solved. That would be, if I had to guess, what Israel would love to see. It's unlikely to happen, not while Ali Khamenei is the supreme leader of Iran.
Alex Vatanka, founding director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute, also a leading author on all of this. Really good to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much.